Hello and welcome to another episode of Metal Effort. My name's Nehemiah, and today we're going to do a 3-knife showdown. In order, we have the Bark River Gunny Skinny in 3V, we have the Malanika Puukko in 4V, and we have the Bark River Aurora in cru-wear. So basically what this video is, it's not necessarily a review on each one. Fixed blades are just kind of simple. How does the knife perform and what kind of uses is it really good for? So effectively, this might end up being all you really need to know to help make a decision on what to buy or not buy, but it's not a full and complete traditional review like I normally do. Basically, I took all three knives on a camping trip and we really put them through our paces, me and a couple buddies of mine, and I'm here to report back and just kind of give you a breakdown on how each knife performs. So we'll just kind of go one at a time and talk about the benefits and maybe some issues for each knife. The reason I have these knives in the first place and why I think they are a good comparison and should be in the same video is these are widely regarded as three of the best options in the bushcraft world. I think they're most famous from the channel Bushcraft Knives with Mickey and Martin. This is Mickey's favorite knife, this is Martin's favorite knife, and then this is both of their second favorite knives. So this is a good chance for me to kind of weigh in with my opinion and see if I agree or disagree or exactly how it all shakes out. So without further ado, let's remove these two and we'll start with the Gunny Skinny. First off, the things that we were kind of doing as far as like what we were actually testing these for is mostly bushcraft types tasks. One knife that's not in the review, for instance, not in this video really, is the Hunter Classic Drop Point. This really is good for processing meats and protein. Not really the kind of thing we were doing out there. It can do some of the tasks that we're going to talk about, but it really wasn't like an amazing performer in those particular arenas. You know, if I was cutting up food or dressing a animal down or something, which is not something I've ever done before or really plan on doing, this would probably be the go-to knife. But that's not the kind of thing we're doing, so we're going to remove that out. I was teaching my two friends how to do some basic things like batoning, where you take a knife and a big log and you put the knife on top of the log and you take another log and you whack the tip of it and basically chop the log in half and then quarters and then eighths so that you can get some good pieces of wood. I actually explained this process in the video that I recorded on the campsite. So this is just a piece of wood that we've batoned down that's ready for feather sticking. And then over here is what it kind of looks like after you're done using it for feather sticking for a little bit. We could obviously go a little bit more, but just wanted to show you kind of the before and after. So as you can see, getting that nice piece of wood is perfect to start feather sticking, which is our second task that we put the knives through. Basically, you want to take the piece of wood and you're gonna run it along the piece of wood, and then like a little curlicue bunch kind of bushes up at the end. Sometimes it just strips off, depends on the kind of wood and the knife and how dry or wet it is, but almost like a little pom-pom of wood at the end of it. It's almost like stringing cheese, but instead of peeling it, you're doing it with a knife. It's kind of what you want to visually put in your mind. Once you have enough of these very thinly sliced little strips of wood, you can break it off and then use a flint, like so, to strike the back of the knife and get some sparks going. So you can effectively start a fire without any matches or gasoline. Yeah, you can put it like down into the. Ooh, yeah, there you go. There you go.
I am all that is man.
In addition to the batoning and the feather sticking, I also wanted to do some carving with each knife. And I'm not super well practiced in carving, as at least in the artistic sense. In fact, this piece of wood is kind of the handiwork. I'll explain which knife did this. What I really wanted to do was make a Harry Potter wand. I had recently been to the Universal Studios and I was planning on buying one. I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd, and I was sad to find out that they didn't have a single wooden wand anywhere to buy. They were all like these crappy plastic resin type stuff. So that was kind of my mission, was to make a wand. Now, I don't think this is finished, and I'm going to continue working on it. This is just what I did on the camping trip, just so you can get an idea exactly what I was capable of doing in one day. But eventually I would like to actually like automate it a little bit, maybe even stain it, and do some more detailed work and get some practice in. But this is kind of the current state at which we left the campsite, just so you have an idea. I might show this later if I decide to get that project done, but that's how it kind of finished. So for each knife, I'm basically going to grade it on those 3 tasks. Those are kind of the 3 main things that a good bushcraft knife would be able to do. Now, each knife can be a little bit better or even more specialized for one of those 3 particular tasks. And there is different geometry and steel types and ergonomics that you want to take into consider for each one, and I'll kind of go over that. For the most part, I would say that the Gunny Scandi really stood out in the feather sticking of the 3. Batoning, it's okay. This is a convex edge and it splits the wood pretty well. It's such an abrupt and shallow kind of split though. It felt a little bit harder to actually hammer it through the log at times. When you compare it to the Aurora, which, you know, is a much higher grind, it was a little bit more of a smooth kind of split as you're batoning. So I would definitely say of the 3, this was probably the second best performing in batoning. For the feather sticking, though, this really short grind, this kind of, not saber grind, but Scandi grind, really effectively wants to curl up the little pieces of wood when you're doing the feather sticking. And so that was like almost cathartic. This was the knife I wanted to use pretty much the whole time for doing feather sticking. I cycled through all 3, but this was definitely my favorite, and I wanted to keep going back to it. Basically, if you don't get the little strands of little thin slices of wood to curl, then they're just going to kind of slice off. You're just cutting it off and it falls off onto the ground. If you can curl it a little bit, that's when it doesn't want to just snap off and break off, and you get the little bushel of thinly sliced wood at the end of that stick that you're doing, like I explained in the video. So this was definitely the top performer in the feather sticking. As far as carving, this is also second place. It gives you a little bit more room to control and kind of decide exactly how deep you want to go and then kind of flip it out. Don't want to do that too much on really, really hard wood, but it's good enough to where you can kind of do a scooping motion given the shape of the bevel. And so carving was good for that. It's thick enough on the back that it's not too much of a problem to like push onto the spine. Sometimes when you're doing really detailed work, you actually ride up, and so like, you know, if this is the work that I'm doing, like when I made the tip, for instance, I'm going to have very controlled pressure right on the back of that knife. And since it's actually kind of wide, that helps. It's not so painful, and you can really be precise and do exactly what you want on the carving. So this was definitely the second place in the carving, and I was pretty happy with it. Let's talk about the Aurora. So this knife, this is much longer than the other 2. This is like 4.5, I want to say. And that extra little, you know, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of length really helps with the batoning. This ended up being our like go-to batoner. We tried it with the other 2, even the Pouco, and you can get it done. Like, it's not the difference between getting it done and not getting it done. It's just this is so much quicker, easier, and wasn't too much of an issue. And you could see all the times that we were smacking on the back of this thing. Maybe let me try to pull that into focus. There you go. And it's a beast. Yeah, it's, you know, maybe only this much is sticking out of it. And my friends were like, "Are you sure I can hit that?" I was like, "Yeah, whale into it, man." And it took it like a champ. So cru-wear is really good for that. Obviously, it has really good toughness. The toughness isn't as high as what's on the 3V, but definitely adequate for batoning. No problem, especially with a nice full tang. This is the LT version, which is lighter than even the normal one, but I was not worried at all, and it performed excellently. So definitely first place for the batoning. For the feather sticking, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It was a smooth cut. The convex edge definitely helps for it. It's, oddly enough, I think this feather sticks better than the Pouco. The biggest reason is that this curves it doesn't curve the slices near as much as the Gunny Skinny does, but definitely more than the Pouco. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about the Pouco, but ultimately this could get it done. I would say maybe half the time I would accidentally slice off the entire piece. So if I had a little, bushel kind of storing up, not officially breaking it apart from the piece of wood, every like 2 or 3 times that I go to try to stop, it'd go shink and just cut it right off. So it was okay. The slices that I was getting that were falling onto the ground, or we put like a bag underneath, were definitely thin enough that it was something that we could easily start a fire with. So as far as the practical, like, actual bits of wood that you're getting, this is perfectly adequate for that. And so this was second place for that. For carving, this was definitely third. You can do it, but it's so much longer that when you're trying to do those same types of cuts, it's a little bit more unwieldy. Your hand is just so much further away, and it tapers a little bit to the end of it to where now, pushing here, it's not near as comfortable on the other 2 knives. And so this wasn't really the best for the detailed work. And since it's bigger and kind of more cumbersome, if I wanted to like really just remove a thin layer or smooth these like bumps out, this really wasn't the knife that I wanted to use for that particular task. It's fine in a pinch. I think for practical like survival / bushcraft, like you need a job doing, I think this is clearly the best option, because the batoning and the feather sticking are more like required things that it needs to be able to do, and it's definitely able to do those things. Carving is, that's more just kind of like a fun thing. If I'm making a spoon, this can get the job done. If I wanted to make something look really good, I'm probably not going to be able to achieve it as easily with this knife, or maybe not even at all, depending on the level of detail work I'm trying to do in that carving. Moving on. Now, the Pouco is amazing. I waited a year for this knife, and I'm very much aware of like the cognitive dissonance that I need to be mindful of just, if I waited so long and I spent so much for this, I don't want my mind to subconsciously trick me into thinking this knife is better than it actually is. So I even held off on doing the review after I got back from my trip. Just I wanted to make sure that my opinions on the knife were pretty well solidified, not something that was just kind of subject to recency bias or just the cost sink that I put into this knife and justifying that cost. I can say I've got a pretty sober outlook on this, or at least more so than it was had I quickly reviewed it. In the batoning, I would basically actively say you probably don't want to baton with this knife at all. If you're in a survival situation, of course, go ahead and do it, where life is actually in the balance. But if you have the choice, or if you have another knife, or you can do something else, I don't recommend it. It's full tang. You can see it actually go all the way back here. So it's not like the knife is going to actively break. And 4V, while it's not as tough as 3V or cru-wear, it could still probably survive for the most part. It's just, you're going to shred the tip a little bit, as far as like, even the baton that you use is just going to get more sunken in. It's going to destroy your baton than really actually get through the log. Small, like little tiny like sticks that you're batoning, little baby ones, I think this would be fine. But if you're doing like an actual log, don't do it on this. This is really just not either not very possible at all because it's so short, or it's just highly inadvisable for many reasons. So definitely worst of the 3 for that particular task. Feather sticking. Now, feather sticking, I thought this was going to be the best. It's shortest blade. It feels like it has the most control as far as like being able to navigate my edge and go as fast or as slow as I need it to do. What I failed to realize is the reason that the Gunny Skinny is so good is because of that super exaggerated convex edge and that Scandi grind that really forces the wood to kind of curl around it. This bevel is a single bevel. I mean, these are 2, it's a convex. There's no secondary like V-edge grind to it at all. But this is a much higher grind, and it's perfectly flat ground. It's not convex like this one is, where it doesn't have a curve to it. It's just shink right to the actual apex. What that means is, this is kind of a pro and a con, but in terms of actual feather sticking, it makes it much more difficult to get any kind of curve to it, because you're doing a straight slice. And so the bite of it, when you stick just barely the edge in and you go to move it along, it just wants to cut the entire thing in half at whatever angle you originally put it in. It's so sharp and straight and like precise that to kind of pull the I'm going to do it like vertically. Like if I go in, directly at an angle, not directly at an angle, but at an angle, in order for it to just take a layer off the top and not continually travel through the entire piece of wood, I have to kind of pull the apex of the blade up so I can continue to kind of shave along the top. So basically, I want to skim across the top, and this wants to dive into the water. It's not skis, it's like a diver. And so that's kind of difficult. Like you have to kind of go slow, and you're just pulling up the whole time just to make sure that it doesn't cut deep and through the wood. It just bites so much. And so for actually being able to curl the wood is almost impossible. I did learn eventually, and this is the knife I use for 90% of the work on this wand, that I could do a straight line. But it's still not curving the wood. And that's like, I'm intentionally keeping it up at that like raised angle, so it cuts. So it was good for like smooth cuts. A lot of these cuts are very like straight and smooth, and they were achieved because of that, just extremely flat bevel. I was able to do that once I like got it to the right spot and held it the whole way through. As far as the actual feather sticking goes, it's like barely adequate in that you really have to concentrate really hard. With the Gunny Skinny, I was able to kind of like get used to it. Like you have to like concentrate. It's like your System 2 mind. If you've ever read the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, it's your System 2 that like learns how to drive, and you're like kind of clumsy and just kind of doing stuff, and then eventually you get used to it and it becomes a habit. And now System 1, the rest of your brain, the subconscious brain, the one that you don't necessarily think with in a first person sense, it takes over that responsibility. And so I kind of got to that point with the Gunny Skinny. I never could get to that point really with this. Maybe it just takes a lot longer to get there, and I need to figure out, maybe doing a different technique to get that stuff to curl, or it's just, this is how it is, and I need to be okay with it. For carving, however, and for like straight lines, this one isn't too bad once I figure that part out. And as far as detailed work, it's incredibly easy to like cut into a specific depth, pull out, and cut again, and get these very straight, precise angles and cuts. And so I was able to, like on the wand here, like almost curve it. I wanted like a little flat part here, and just kind of like, I wanted it to be like egg-shaped almost, which I achieved. And it was just very precise, little tiny cuts, and it was very comfortable and easy for me to control exactly where I wanted the blade to go and exactly what I wanted it to do. And so for the carving aspect of it, I think the Pouco is really in the right spot for that. I was a little bit disappointed that it wasn't as intuitive on the feather sticking, but really each knife does shine in its own right. You have the Aurora is really good for the batoning aspect of things. It's just a champ. You have the Gunny Skinny for the feather sticking, and you have the Pouco for the detailed carve work, which, is kind of good. This makes sense. A specialty of a particular knife to get a particular job done. That's great. As far as my recommendation of, if you can only pick one of these things and you're going to do all three things in some semi-equal amount, I would say go with the Aurora. I think this is the best kind of jack of all trades, master of none. If I could only have one, it'd probably be the Aurora. The one that I'm most smitten by is still the Pouco, but even then, if I can only have one knife, I still think I would take this one over the Pouco in terms of just sheer practicality. If I'm just gonna hold the knife, use the knife, appreciate the craftsmanship, appreciate the sheath that came with it, I guess style points alone, the Pouco's gonna win. And if I was seriously gonna get into carving, like if I knew how to do it and I actually did it on the regular, I think the Pouco would move up in my I could only have one knife pick order. But as it stands, I think they all deserve their own, niche. And I hope this helps if you're looking for like a high quality fixed blade. This might at least give you a good starting off point as far as like blade shapes and just kind of options out there, kind of the best of the best. So I hope this was helpful to you. And with this, I'll leave you with a couple clips from our trip. Yes, those are real bugs. That is not CG. That was recorded on my friend's phone. We were in the tent. He went to turn the light off. This is what he recorded and ran back in. Bugs were everywhere. They didn't sting. They were pretty benign, but it was a pretty miserable night because of the bugs. The next day, it was fine. They were all dead, and they weren't really bothering us throughout the day. But boy, I've never seen so many bugs in one place ever. That is nuts. It was crazy. That was like an Indiana Jones movie, man. It's weird.